The pool ball rolled slowly across the green felt, turned once, twice, and then disappeared into the corner pocket. For a second, the entire penthouse seemed to stop breathing. I looked at the table, then at the woman standing across from me, and my heart nearly broke when I realized what was at stake. She was my CEO, the most intimidating woman in our company, the woman who could silence an entire boardroom with one look. Yet that afternoon, beneath the warm golden sunlight pouring through the penthouse windows, she had made me a promise that could change both our lives. One impossible pool shot. One reckless bet. And if I sank it, she owed me a kiss. Before we go deeper into this emotional story, if you believe everyone deserves kindness, forgiveness, and a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to you. My name is Kellan Mercer, and until that strange afternoon, I had spent most of my life believing that people like me were never supposed to enter worlds like hers. I worked as a junior financial analyst at a technology company called North Star Dynamics, where the offices were filled with glass walls, expensive suits, polished floors, and people who seemed to know exactly where they were going. I was different. I had grown up in a small apartment with my grandmother, learned early that money disappeared faster than it arrived, and carried an old fear that one mistake could send my entire life collapsing. I worked harder than almost everyone around me, but I rarely believed I belonged in the rooms where decisions were made. Then there was Seraphina Vale, our CEO. She was 34, brilliant, disciplined, and almost impossible to read. She had taken over North Star when it was close to collapse and transformed it into one of the fastest-growing companies in the city. Employees respected her, executives feared disappointing her, and the newspapers loved calling her ruthless. I had never seen her smile. My opinion of her began changing on an ordinary Tuesday morning when I discovered a serious mistake in one of our quarterly reports. The error had been made by a senior executive, but because I was the analyst assigned to review the figures, the responsibility was about to fall on me. I remember sitting at my desk while the office around me continued moving, everyone pretending not to notice the panic on my face. Losing my job would have meant more than losing a paycheck. My grandmother depended on me for almost everything, and we had already been struggling with rent and medical bills. I expected Seraphina to call me into her office and end my career. Instead, she studied the report, recognized exactly where the error had originated, and quietly corrected the record. She did not embarrass the executive responsible, and she did not take credit for protecting me. She simply told me that mistakes were not the measure of a person, but what they did after making them was. That sentence stayed with me. Over the next few months, something unexpected happened. Seraphina began trusting me with increasingly important projects. She noticed details other people ignored, and I noticed things about her that nobody else seemed to see. She always arrived before everyone else. She ate lunch alone. She kept an old photograph of a young man and a little girl tucked inside a drawer in her office. Sometimes, when she thought nobody was watching, she would stand beside the window and stare at the city with an expression that looked less like confidence and more like loneliness. I eventually learned that the young man in the photograph had been her older brother, Lucian, who had died years earlier after taking responsibility for a business decision that had nearly destroyed their family. Seraphina had spent years rebuilding everything he had lost, but in doing so, she had forgotten how to let anyone get close enough to help carry the weight. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. It was a bright summer day, the kind when the city looked almost beautiful from above. A major investor meeting had ended successfully, and Seraphina had unexpectedly invited a few members of our team to her penthouse for a casual celebration. Most people left after lunch, but I stayed behind to finish reviewing some documents. When I finally closed my laptop, sunlight was spilling across the living room, and I found Seraphina standing beside a private pool table near the enormous windows. She looked completely different outside the office. She had removed her jacket, loosened her hair, and seemed almost human rather than the untouchable CEO everyone knew. She noticed me looking at the table and challenged me to a game. I warned her that I was not very good, but she smiled and told me that she had already figured that out. There was something playful in her expression that I had never seen before. The game began innocently. She was far better than I expected, and I quickly found myself losing. Every time I missed a shot, she seemed more amused. The afternoon sun moved slowly across the room while the city glittered beyond the glass. Eventually, only one ball remained for each of us. I was nervous, partly because I had never been alone with her like this and partly because I had started to realize that my feelings for her were becoming impossible to ignore. Then Seraphina leaned against the edge of the table and proposed a final bet. If she won, I would have to admit that she was the better player. If I won, she would give me whatever I wanted, within reason. I laughed and told her that sounded dangerous. She looked directly into my eyes and changed the terms. If I sank the shot, she owed me a kiss. My heart stopped. I thought she was joking, but she did not look away. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant sounds of traffic far below, and my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs. I had spent months trying to convince myself that whatever existed between us was only admiration. Now she had placed the truth on the table beside the cue ball. I could have walked away. I could have laughed and ended the game. Instead, I picked up the cue. But before I could take the shot, Seraphina's expression changed. The confidence disappeared from her face, replaced by something fragile. She admitted that she had made the bet because she was tired of being treated like someone who could never be hurt. Everyone around her wanted something from her. Investors wanted results, employees wanted answers, relatives wanted favors, and even friends expected strength. She confessed that sometimes she wondered whether anyone would stay if she stopped being successful. I suddenly understood why she had built so many walls. They were not there because she thought she was better than everyone else. They were there because she was terrified that if someone saw how lonely she really was, they would eventually leave. I lowered the cue. Instead of taking the shot, I told her that I did not want to win a kiss from someone who was afraid to trust me. I told her that I would rather have an honest friendship than a moment she might regret. She stared at me for a long time, and something in her eyes softened. Then she told me that nobody had ever answered one of her challenges that way. She had expected me to chase the prize. I had chosen to protect the person offering it. That evening, she told me more about her brother. Lucian had been the person who taught her that success meant nothing if you had nobody to share it with. After his death, Seraphina had become obsessed with proving that she could survive without anyone. She had succeeded. But somewhere along the way, she had mistaken independence for happiness. I told her about my grandmother and the lessons she had taught me about kindness, failure, and starting over. We sat beside the pool as the sunlight faded, and for the first time, Seraphina laughed without trying to hide it. It was a small sound, but I knew I would remember it forever. The following weeks were difficult. Rumors began spreading at the company. People noticed that Seraphina trusted me, and some assumed I had received special treatment. Then a major project failed, and several executives tried to use me as a scapegoat. I was prepared to resign rather than let Seraphina's reputation suffer because of me. But she stood beside me in front of the board and told them exactly what had happened. She accepted her share of the responsibility and refused to sacrifice an employee to protect herself. It was the moment I realized the woman I had admired was even stronger than I thought, not because she never fell, but because she refused to let fear decide who she would become. Months later, my grandmother's health suddenly worsened, and I considered leaving the company to care for her. I felt guilty for even thinking about my career when family needed me. Seraphina surprised me again. She arranged flexible working hours, made sure my position was secure, and quietly sent support without ever making me feel indebted. She told me that success meant very little if it required abandoning the people who had helped you survive. Those words healed something inside me that I had not realized was wounded. One bright afternoon, almost a year after the pool game, Seraphina and I returned to the penthouse. The same sunlight filled the room. The same pool table waited beneath the windows. She placed 2 glasses on the table and smiled. This time, there was no business between us, no pressure, no challenge designed to hide our feelings. She asked me to play one more game. I accepted. The game ended with the final ball resting near the same corner pocket where our lives had begun changing. I looked at her, and she smiled as though remembering the old bet. She told me that technically, she still owed me a kiss. I told her that I had forgotten about the bet. She stepped closer and reminded me that she had not. Then, with the afternoon sunlight glowing around us, she kissed me gently. It was not dramatic. There were no cameras, no applause, no perfect movie soundtrack. It was simply 2 people who had spent years building walls finally deciding that they did not need them anymore. In that moment, I understood something I had never learned from money, success, or ambition. Sometimes the greatest victory is not getting what you wanted. Sometimes it is becoming the kind of person who can be trusted with someone else's heart. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that people can change, and subscribe to Epic Story Hub for more emotional stories. And before we reach the final line, I have one special request for you. Comment "second chances" below if you believe one act of kindness can change the direction of someone's entire life. Because that pool shot was never really about a kiss. It was about 2 lonely people standing on opposite sides of a table, both afraid to take a chance. One of them was afraid of losing control. The other was afraid of never being enough. But sometimes life gives us a single moment when we can choose fear or faith, pride or kindness, loneliness or connection. I took the shot, but the truth is, Seraphina and I both won that day. She learned that she did not have to carry everything alone, and I learned that even someone who feels invisible can become important in another person's story. And whenever I think about that sunny afternoon, I remember that the most beautiful moments in life are rarely the ones we plan. Sometimes they begin with a simple game, an impossible bet, and the courage to believe that someone might stay.